Thanks for joining me. So this will be a very simple and straightforward demonstration of how I kolrose a wooden spoon. Here we go. I'll take you through these items that I use for kolrosing. First we have tung oil. It's completely non-toxic and food safe. I have finely crushed coffee. It's used as a pigment and it smells delicious. We have a bendable ruler to keep lines straight, a pencil, a kolrosing knife, a regular knife, and a burnishing stone as well. Just to simplify things a little bit, we're just going to use a regular sloyd knife, a pencil, and of course this is the wooden spoon that we will be decorating today. I just want to show you that you don't need expensive or complicated equipment. You can do it with just a regular carving knife and a pencil and some coffee. So the design I'll be doing is very simple and I won't be thinking too much about it. I'm just going to go for it. It's just a geometric pattern that I frequent sometimes. It's just a series of straight lines, dots, which are made by just stabbing the tip of your knife, and that's pretty much it. Using a combination of those, you can take a plain piece and just add a little bit of special decoration to it. With that being said, don't feel compelled to always kolrose your spoon. Sometimes the natural wood grain is all the decoration that you need. Nature provides. So I'm not going to think about the design too much, but I am going to try to keep it symmetrical, even though it is never really truly 100% symmetrical. So while I do want it to look straight because it'll look better and more professional, it doesn't really matter in the end. It's a handmade item and it should behave like a handmade item. So that means imperfect. Drawing little boxes and grids like this can help to keep things symmetrical, and do make sure that you keep your pencil lines nice and soft, keeping it nice and light so that you're able to erase it easier later on. So I always keep a white eraser nearby, or I just use the back of this mechanical pencil. Kolrosing is an older art form, and they say it originates out of ancient Scandinavia. Although, considering it's such a simple practice, I don't doubt that they did it all over the world and probably have been doing it all over the world since the dawn of humankind. After all, what's complicated about scratching a design into a piece of wood and then getting it dirty? Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're scratching a design into the surface of the wood. To be more specific, you're using the tip of the knife to separate the wooden fibers. After that, you're going to oil the spoon and then you'll rub your pigment into it. And I'll show you these steps in just a little bit. So I am done drawing my design now, and I'm gonna go ahead and take the sloyd knife to it. I'm gonna choke it up like a pencil, and the blade is actually resting on my finger, but I'm pinching it firmly enough that it's not going to move around, therefore it's not going to slice me. It does take some getting used to, and I do have some calluses, so if you're not used to this kind of thing, I suggest wrapping up the blade in painter's tape. Just wrap it up completely and leave the tip of the knife exposed. This will protect your fingers from any sort of harm. So a nice tip here is to use your opposite thumb as a brace, and that's just sort of going to prevent you from slipping too far. That's a common mistake at any level of skill when it comes to kolrosing, is to slip through the design and basically alter it entirely. And you can really tell as the artist, you'll be able to tell, and you'll just see that little mistake and it'll really bug you. But do keep in mind that mistakes do happen and it's all part of the learning process. I made plenty of mistakes and countless slips in my time kolrosing and designing spoons, and I hardly ever slip anymore, but it still does happen every once in a while. So try not to let it bother you. It really doesn't matter. Usually you're the only one that sees the mistake and no one else will. So going down the wood grain, so down the front of the handle in a straight line, it will actually follow the wood grain easier. So how do I put this? When drawing straight down, your knife will tend to want to follow the wood grain. So if the line of your design does not follow the wood grain 100%, just keep that in mind because it will slip out of the design then. So here you're seeing just the stabbing of the sloyd down, and that's a really easy way to make a nice imprint. So the aim of this demonstration is just to show you that you don't need to overthink it and the design doesn't have to be overly complicated. Even just 3 scratches at different lengths, that is something of a design, and it does add a little bit to it. Sometimes less is more, and in this case, I want to keep it much less and just use one of my go-to weird little geometric patterns that I frequent sometimes. Usually I use this exact same pattern, but a lot smaller, and I just tuck it underneath a basket weave, for instance. A basket weave is another design that I frequent. It was one of the first designs I learned to do, and it is sort of a staple of the kolrosing art form. I can make another video sometime to demonstrate how I do this. It's quite different, and you do follow a grid pattern as well for that one as well. There's a few different ways to do it, and there's a lot of great learning materials out there by a lot of really good makers. So I'm just continuing on here, trying to get all the pencil lines with the knife. You can hold the spoon up to the light. This really helps if you're out in the sunlight because you can see your work a lot easier. But I have a strong light casting straight on the work, which really helps. So do make sure you're in a well-lit area. I'm actually standing here, but I recommend sitting with your back straight at a desk so that you can lean right over your work. I want to actually get a headlamp because I feel as though that'd be a really great way to cast light directly on my work, and I wouldn't have to worry about it, it being too dim or too dark, because if it is too dim, it's easy to make a mistake and miss up. But you can always go back and touch it up later. So, as is habitual for how I do my work, I only put the maker's mark on when I'm completely finished. So here I am just applying my maker's mark. Some makers don't like to use maker's marks. They just leave the spoon as they made it without any marks whatsoever, but I know quite a few makers where I can tell it's their work just by the style and the shape. So that in itself is as good as any signature. Personally, I love to use a maker's mark. It represents my work, and since my maker's mark evolves over time and changes, it's a good indication of when my spoon was made. And no matter when and where my spoon goes, we'll always know that it belongs to, that it was made by me. So here I am just erasing the pencil marks. They were nice and light, as I mentioned, so they come right off. But even if they don't all come off, so even if the pencil marks don't all come off right away, usually come off with the oil. It acts as a bit of a solvent and removes even more of the graphite. So here you're getting a better look at the design itself. And now I'm going to apply some tung oil. And now you'll really see it start to show up because it's going to soak right down into those cuts and penetrate all of the wood grain. I don't think I mentioned it yet. This is a cherry spoon, and the wood grain on it is beautiful. This was very dry stuff. It's a very special piece of wood because it comes from a family tree. It's from my wife's grandfather's farm. Pretty tough stuff to carve though, especially since it was dry. So it took a toll on my carving knives, but it was worth it. Sometimes it doesn't seem like I'll get something out of a piece of wood, but if you persevere and don't ruin the piece, usually you'll get something out of it. In this case, I was able to get this eating spoon out of it. So now that I have it all oiled up, it's time to apply my pigment. Now do keep in mind, if you get it anywhere else on the spoon, it may stain it. So try to keep it isolated to only the area where the kolrosing cuts are. So what I like to do is I will rub it into the cuts until I feel it go dry, and then I do one last rub of some fresh, dry coffee powder. So this way, the design tends to show up really bold and dark. And I'll just continue to rub until I'm satisfied with how it looks. You can visibly see that it's caked into all the little spots, And here's where you'll really be able to tell if you missed any of those pencil lines. And it does happen frequently that you'll notice that you missed some of the pencil lines. So yes, keep in mind that it will alter the patina of where you're rubbing the coffee. It will get into the grain. There's really no way around it. I've seen some techniques out there. I've seen one maker boil the spoon in milk, and don't ask me how that works or even if it did work, but I believe it was an attempt to close up the pores to prevent any kind of staining. So now that everything's applied, I'm going to go ahead and wipe it down with a paper towel. And then I will go ahead and wipe the rest of the spoon off and get any of that excess oil off. Now, especially linseed oil, there's a big warning right on the can that you need to dispose safely of the paper towel, so I just go ahead and assume that tung oil is the exact same. The reason for that being that the rags soaked in linseed oil or possibly tung oil are highly combustible and can randomly burst into flames. So I just soak the paper towel in water and throw it in the trash. So just try to be very safe about how you dispose of those oil-soaked paper towels. So as I was talking away, I was burnishing the kolrosing cuts, and that's the most important step. When you burnish those kolrosing cuts with the pigment in it, it closes the fibers over the design and locks it in permanently. That's really the most important step. I have spoons that I've been using for years with kolrosing designs all over it, and in some cases the kolrosing design is right in the bowl itself, and to this day it still looks great. So hope you enjoyed this demonstration.